Hi, thanks very much for coming here. My name is Steve Fischbach. I'm the litigation director for the Virginia Poverty Law Center, which is the organization that provides support to all of the legal aid organizations in the state of Virginia. I'm actually brand new to Virginia. I've only been in the state since last September, and before that was based in Rhode Island, where I did a lot of EJ work. And so that's the connection. Even though I'm new to Virginia, I'm well versed in environmental justice litigation. So what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get on with the actual. You okay?
Yes.
With the actual program. Okay, so I'll start off with Charles, and then we'll work this way.
Good morning. My name is Charles Caffee. I am a resident of Lambert's Point in Norfolk, Virginia, and I also work for New Virginia Majority for the last 5 years.
My name is Laury. I'm from Buckingham, Virginia. I reside in the Union Hill community, and we're here today to give you a little information on what's going on in our community.
My name is John W. Laury. I'm also from the Union Hill community. And right now, for the last 4.5 years, have become a community activist fighting against this proposed compressor station.
And we have a treat to hear from our frontline activists today. I'm Finley-Brook. I'm from the University of Richmond. And I've worked in Newport News, which is part of the Port of Virginia, which is one of the major coal facilities for the last 4.5 years with Southeast Care Coalition. So that's one of the areas that I do work with. We've helped start an environmental justice collaborative in the state of Virginia. And I was fundamentally involved in that. I would love to talk about our EJ Collaborative. We're up to about 23 different organizations. We work with both of these communities in particular. And then we were formative in the creation of the Governor's Council on Environmental Justice, which was disbanded in January. And there is a new tokenized incarnation that is being started currently. And I'd love to talk about that. I was on the first council. And so we would love to talk about where things are going or not going in Virginia and how to put a little bit of pressure to make sure that these very serious concerns about environmental racism in these two communities. We didn't learn anything from coal. We're going straight at it hard with natural gas, and we're not learning anything from the mistakes of the past, and we're really skirting the issue. So I'm so excited to hear from our panelists their experiences. They have been frontline on all of this. New Virginia Majority is doing quite a lot with the EJ Collaborative as well. So we're going to be able to tie together these two geographies and the threats that really are facing both communities and think about how to move forward on it.
Okay.
I just want to make a quick announcement that we're going to be ending at 11:50 and cutting out the 5-minute break in between. So right after this, we'll just go to the next session. 11:50 is the end.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I'll turn it over to Charles from the Lambert Point community, which is in Norfolk.
Okay. Good morning. As I stated, my name is Charles Caffee. I work for New Virginia Majority. Presently, we're working on quite a few things: voter registration, restoration of rights, environmental work, and also the relocation. And I'm basically working on the coal dust issue and the relocation. But today I'm going to speak on the coal dust. We started working in Norfolk in the Lambert's Point community about 3 years ago on the coal dust issue with Norfolk Southern Railroad, which opened up in 1894. Back then it was called Norfolk and Western Railroad, and then Norfolk Southern acquired the location. The pier there is Pier 6, which opened in 1962. right now, as of the coal dust issue, Norfolk Southern was grandfathered in, which means they do their own monitoring and they don't have to cover their coal cars, which creates a lot of issues in that community and in the whole city of Norfolk and all up the rail line. And Norfolk Southern mostly runs through low-income communities of color. Those are basically the neighborhoods that they run through. Norfolk Southern sits on the Elizabeth River, and they say that by watering down the coal cars and the coal, that keeps the dust from flying, but which it does not do a great job. But when they water it down, it runs into the Elizabeth River and the different waterways. They dump, Pier 6 dumped their 1 billion ton of coal in 1999. It dumps up to 8,000 tons of coal per hour, and it can load 2 ships at a time. It does complete coal blending and mixing and dumping, and it operates 24 hours a day. And also, the train runs 24 hours, mostly at night, so it impacts and disturbs the community, shakes the foundation of the house. Coal dust goes into the house. Most people have to change their filters once every month, basically. It has a lot of health impacts. Did you pass it up? It has a lot of health impacts, which she's gonna pass out to everyone. It also impacts persons' homes, the discoloration, the coal cars, and it has a lot of health impacts. On the first sheet that looks like this is a list of the health impacts. Asthma for one, bronchitis, the inflammation of the lining of the bronchial tubes, chronic bronchitis, COPD, a progressive group of lung disease that block airflow and make it difficult to breathe, emphysema, infant mortality rate, lung cancer, black lung disease, heart disease, kidney disease, pneumonia, premature deaths, a lot of health impacts. Working in the community organizing, we had one young mother who had 3 kids, who has 3 kids. When she moved into the neighborhood and bought a house, no one told her about the Pier 6, the coal dumping pier, and the transport. She had one child, he was like 5 years old. When they moved there, he was on 1 asthma medication. Now he takes 17 medications per day due to the coal dust issues. And premature death, and as you can see, the last sheet we have a picture of some residents that we do a protest, a small protest, and Norfolk Southern, the General Assembly in 2017 was ordered. 2018, the House Subcommittee, Delegate McKnight, ordered that Norfolk Southern meet with the residents of Lambert's Point and its stakeholders before the session was up. That never happened. We sent letters to Norfolk Southern, to the President, James Squires, and with no return calls or any answers to any letters. And that's basically it.
Okay, Union Hill, you're up.
as I said before, my name is Ruby Laury, and it's definitely an honor and a privilege to be here today. As you may know, communities with people of color and low income are chosen for these toxic waste facilities and industrial plants. These facilities are life-threatening because of the poisonous toxic gases that we would have to breathe. The effects of what happens when these compressor stations have a blowdown, you'll see children and adults with serious nosebleeds, severe headaches, respiratory problems, and they will be affected by the extremely loud noises. Fracking emits poisonous gases. My name, as I said before, is Ruby Laury. My husband and I retired to beautiful Buckingham County to live out our golden years and to raise cattle as a vocation. We lived a good life there until Dominion chose our Union Hill community to build a gigantic 53,000 plus horsepower compressor station for their Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Our historic African American community was founded by freedmen who once worked on local plantations. Dominion overlooked us as if we didn't exist, endangering those most affected by this noisy, toxic compressor station. This project will unfairly jeopardize our air, our water, our health, and our lives. I'm originally from Southern California. I moved here almost 15 years ago with my husband. And after initially getting over the shock of how dark it was at night, no lights. After that, I understood why my husband wanted to move back to Buckingham, because it is a beautiful place and one of the most quiet and peaceful. No pollution, lots of clean air. Usually no stress. That is until 4.5 to 5 years ago when we came up with this problem. As I said before, I have a great concern for our water, our air. We won't be able to go outside if this should happen to come through. We won't be able to drink our well water because they cannot guarantee that there will not be any leaks. As I said before, the poisonous gases will be released into the atmosphere, and our quaint little community will not be fit for humans or animals to live. We live in an agriculture area where we raise crops, cattle, dairy cows, donkeys, goats, chickens, and so forth. That is until Dominion convinced the Board of Supervisors they wanted a special permit to change the zoning. And I ask, is this legal? As far as we're concerned, this is still an agricultural area, not for Dominion, who originally said we will be able to receive natural gas. That's not true. This gas will be fracked, which will emit, the unsafe gases. And when we first started the project, well, when we first found out about this natural gas, there was a young lady who came to our door and said she wanted to talk to us about what was happening, but they wanted to bring through natural gas. And at that time I said, well, we had natural gas in California. We didn't have any problems. And she said, yes, but it's going to be fracked. Well, of course, at that time, I did not know what fracked gas meant, but I found out. Dominion, they, actually, what they really want to do is they want to make money. They're planning to ship this gas overseas for monetary gain. But you know, my Bible says that the root of money is the root of, the love of money is the root of all evil. And they just want to come in here and condemn our community. Like I said, as if we don't exist, we don't matter. Our agricultural lands will be destroyed in the path of these monsters, and this beautiful scenery that attracts many people, including my relatives and friends from California, to Buckingham, it will be in jeopardy. And many studies have shown that hazardous and solid waste facilities, power stations, and industrial plants, like the proposed compressor station, are excessively sited in communities of color and low-income neighborhoods. And most importantly, these plants that emit this toxic air and noise pollution will definitely have a significant effect on the health and well-being of us living in the Union Hill community. The Department of Environmental Quality had the audacity to tell us how much poison we can breathe and say it won't hurt us. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. We're not asking for money. We're just asking for clean air, clean water, and a place to live where we will feel safe. This proposed compressor station and pipelines are not needed and not wanted in our area or any other area. Let me tell you something that happened. All of a sudden, Dominion came in at the 11th hour to butter up the Union Hill community. But we know they're not concerned about us. In my opinion, they're treating us like we are criminals on our own land, in our own homes, but actually, they are the modern day gangsters. They came to Buckingham dictating to us what they were going to do to our community. They're going to put a compressor station and pipeline. They have no consideration. They have no conscience. Some of us have been divided since that happened, but we really don't hold any animosity with each other. You see, the real enemy here is Satan. And as we all know, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. The real enemy here is Dominion, who is being used of the devil to try to divide us by throwing us a few crumbs and think we are going to fall for their tactics. We are Christians, and we stand for righteousness' sake. We stand for Jesus. He is our advocate, not Dominion. We want to live out our golden years here in this beautiful, serene area where we can sit outside and breathe clean air, and at night we can look up at the stars in the heavens and just see how beautiful it is. We had a blackout, or electricity went off one night, and it was so dark, but we went outside, and if you just looked in the sky, you saw so many stars. It was amazing. It was just beautiful. Like I said, God put us here to be good stewards of this beautiful land. We are to take care of it, not pollute it. And then I hope that Governor Northam gets a chance to see this video. Although Governor Northam dismissed Karen Rubin and Samuel Bleicher, two of the members of the State Air Pollution Control Board, who who were scheduled to vote on the permit. My husband keeps hitting me, is my time up?
Yeah. He's eager to talk.
Wait a minute, they were scheduled to vote on the controversial issue of allowing Dominion Energy's most dangerous Atlantic Coast pipeline to be placed in our community. And he dismantled his advisory council on environmental justice, who recommended that he, the governor, place a suspension on the ACP until an environmental justice review was completed. He ignored their recommendations. But I just want to let Governor Northern know that our lives do matter. So Governor, please stand up for what is right and stop this proposed ACP and compressor station. I will leave you with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Never, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way. And in our church, we go to Union Grove Baptist Church in Buckingham, and there's a banner on the back wall that says, "Stand up for what is right, even if you're standing alone." Thank you.
My name is John W. Laury. I was born and raised in the community where I now live, approximately a quarter mile away from where my home is. On my grandfather's farm, at that time it was 52 acres, where we had cows, a couple of horses, and chickens and hogs, garden, we raised garden, fruit trees and all of that. Well, we pretty much sustained our need for food. We didn't have to stand in the store, grocery store lines to survive, only for salt and sugar, that type. Not like today. And we have this beautiful creeks, woods, lots of springs, hillsides, and we knew all our neighbors, and we all got along. We may have all been poor, but we were rich in spirit. And we really wasn't lacking for anything of importance. But, and I went to school in that area. After graduating from high school, I went to join the military.
Can I also just interject there? So all three schools that he went to in Buckingham County were segregated African-American schools. The desegregation happened in 1972, of course, so he's told me about some of these one-room houses, schoolhouses, and the school system that he went through when he talks about doing all three schools, and Union Hill walking over to segregated African-American historic schools that have since been taken down but are part of the historic district.
Yeah, that was our first school, Union Grove. It was, they taught one-room school, grades 1 through 5. From that to a middle school in Dillon, 5 grades, 6, 7, and 8, and from there to the high school, College E. Woodson, where I graduated from. From there to the military, and after military, I settled down in Southern California. Retired from a job at 35 years, then I returned to Virginia, Buckingham, of course. I like Buckingham because the peace, the quietness, the natural beauty, the historical sites. The community, as been stated, was founded by freedmen, slave, and the community is surrounded by slave owners. They still, it's pretty much hush, but a lot of slave graves are still around, slave cemeteries. Even though they're not marked graves, there may be one or two headstones, but lots of rocks, sunken areas, history that we may not ever determine who's there. Not only in Buckingham, but surrounding counties as well. Because of the slave owners, they have huge plantations, thousands. The slave owners were Wall Street. Slaves were considered stocks. They wasn't called slaves, they're called stocks. But back to the community, I love the rolling hills, and above all that, I love the Four Seasons. Southern California, due to the climate, we didn't have the Four Seasons, so we didn't know how to slow down. Much around wide open all the time. But here you get a chance to relax when the weather, snow and ice on the ground. So, all was going well until 2014 when the Board of Supervisors decided to allow Dominion to have a special use permit. And the way the special use permit came in, we still battling that. It went all the way to the Virginia Supreme Court. They threw it out on technicality. Buckingham General Court, they passed it on, and the judge said that you have a good case, but if I was you, I'll appeal it. No one wants to go against Dominion. So nevertheless, we are still struggling. It's a frustrating struggle, but it's a worthwhile struggle. Because of some quotes from Dr. King, it says, a man dies when he refuses to stand up for what is right. And a man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. And a man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. And there's another quote that says, we have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and action of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Either way, we are guilty for this mess that's going on around us, that we allow it. Two ways of sinning, omission and commission. So, in this struggle here is in the Union Hill community on this proposed compressor station. But in every state, corporate America are doing things that is unhealthy for people that of poor, lower income, people of color, or the Native Americans. They're being taken advantage of. doing it for profit. We have to take a stand against that. In the Union Hill community, we have to depend on our underground water source. That's the only water we have, well water. This proposed compressor station, 600-mile long, beginning in West Virginia, ending in North Carolina. It crosses over and under over 1,300 watersheds, including the James River. The James River supplied much water. The water runs downstream. Water begins in the mountain, and it ends in Chesapeake Bay. So not only will it harm the area up in Buckingham, but all the way along the path, we all will be affected. Right now, we cannot depend on our government. Even though we have regulatory agencies that are supposed to be intact for our protection, but they are in cahoots with with big business. As Dominion told us that they work with EPA, with DEQ, to help set the standard. That don't leave us much to live with there. We don't have much to go by as far as our protection. They even now, Dominion, in order for them to obtain that permit, they left the proposed amount of emission that this proposed compressor station, approximately 54,000 horsepower, would be emitting. This is on the low emission scale. The low, the very lowest. No way. Tons per year. And they tell us this is good. We don't have, the Dominion will not give us an escape plan. No blast zone. This proposed compressor station is like a time bomb. If it goes, people within certain radius is automatic devastated. It's no use in calling the rescue squad. There's nothing they can do with a 42-inch frac line gas with the valves approximately 14 to 15 miles apart, filled with frac gas. What they can do is stay out of the area until the gas fire burns down. In the meantime, the destruction is unheard of. At the same time, our former governor, McAuliffe, made a sweetheart deal with Dominion. $58 million would go to the state, but none to the community, the people who will be affected. This is what I meant by this whole issue of this proposed compressor station being so frustrated, because we've been lied to so from day one by our supervisors, by Dominion. They will not tell us the truth. They divided the community April and May of 2018. Dominion, along with a community representative, came up with a plan B. You want to partner with the community. What do the community want? One of the members said, we want you to, here's the way the member worded it. He said, now you want to build a crack house in the community, and then turn around and offer to build a hospital. If you don't build a crack house, then we won't need the hospital. So we're simply saying we don't want the proposed compressor station. But they came up on Plan B with a $5.1 million with Dominion controlling it. They have figures out, which is secret. People living within 1.25 mile radius of the proposed compressor station will get X amount of dollars. Up to a 2 miles radius. The farther out from the proposed compressor station, the less amount of money you get. But it's all secret. All the permits have been passed, Dominion, been okayed for Dominion, but there have been it's right now there have been lawsuits that's been filed, which we have filed against our regulatory agencies and Dominion, and they're tied up in court. May be cleared by the fall of the year, or may not. We hope it will not be. But Dominion has money unlimited because of the ratepayers. Dominion and the stockholders will not lose as long as the ratepayers are there. Working on legislation every day. Some of the highest influential attorneys from around the world and in the USA on that team. But one thing is for certain. We are stewards of God's creation. And it's our duty to protect God's creation. And we're going to trust God.
I feel very fortunate to be able to follow that up and tie this together a little bit. I do want to go back to Norfolk. I'm going to end up in Union Hill. There was a lot that I wanted to speak about in terms of where we are and where I think we can put some pressure on. Things are very problematic in Virginia. I recognize a few of you from Virginia, but I would say most of you probably don't know what's been going on within the state. Of course, the topics that we're talking about go across many states, whether we're talking about coal, that's of course coming from across Appalachia. When we're talking about the natural gas, we've got to tie together where those sources are in Marcellus, where it's coming down through all of these states and pipelines, and of course, as they've mentioned, it's going to be exported. So I think all of this ties together very, very well, but I think what we need to go back to is what I was hearing from both sets of communities and in my own experience as well. There's a lack of accountability. We're very clear. I mean, the handout that you got on what coal dust does to people, particularly children, we know that there's a high rate of asthma in the children that live around these coal facilities. We know the harm that's happening. Not only do we know that harm, the hospitals in the area know that harm. The universities in the area know that harm. The politicians in the area know that harm. And you know what? They all accept money from the railroads. They all accept money from Southern, they all accept money from the coal companies, and they all have known this is happening, and they know there's grandfathering. They know that the watering of the coal does not keep it from getting into people's lungs. Wow. There is no question what's going on. The local governments, I would say, pretty much are bought and sold based on not only the military, but also the energy that feeds the military. If you go into this area, I call it a toxic soup, and I hate to say that because the most beautiful people that I've ever met in my life live in the Hampton Roads area, but it is a toxic soup. It is pathetic. And I'm not even going to go off on the lead poisoning cases that I've been working on, but these same communities that live next to the coal yards live next to the shipyards. And the shipyards, not only are they have been brought up in Superfund legislation, many of the different industrial facilities there, but they're being exposed to so many different things. And when I sit down with a community and they're talking about the miscarriages and the lost babies and the babies that died in people's arms at birth, and when you talk to them and you don't know whether it's because they were lead poisoned or whether it was the arsenic or whether it was some other heavy metal, and you sit there in a room full of people and you know that they were put in a housing community, it was built for African American community, and it was built on toxic soil, and the people in the planning in the state government knew it and kept it quiet, and people are being poisoned as a result. But when you sit down to them and you talk to them, they don't know if they got it when they were in middle school across from a soap factory, sick on the fumes every single day, or whether it is just the coal dust, or whether it is just the shipyard, or whether it is the power plant that's across the street. There is so much going on. This is definitely environmental justice and environmental racism, but the burden in Hampton Roads is astonishing, and is one of the reasons we started the Environmental Justice Collaborative. So our founding came out of the Hampton Roads area. It came out of these coal communities, these frontline impacted communities. We, this last year and the last couple of years, have had to focus on natural gas because of what's happened in Union Hill. So I don't want to talk about one community without the other. I really feel like both need to be front and center every time we talk about Virginia and we talk about environmental racism. But what ended up happening is we know that you never received the attention that you should have. It was grandfathered in. There is no accountability. Every time we've asked for air monitors, the only air monitors are 10, 20 miles away. They're in predominantly white, affluent communities. They do not impact where those hot spots are. We have fought for years to get air monitors. Has not happened. So when you go to Union Hill and they're talking about these blowdowns from the compressor station along this pipeline, and they're saying they're going to notify people when they have planned blowdowns. You all know a lot of blowdowns are not planned, but when they have planned blowdowns, they say they're going to notify people. Okay, put yourself in Buckingham County. You heard people talking about how the lack of lights and the beauty and the lack of noise. There's also not internet. It's a cell phone desert. How do you think people are going to get warning notices? We're going to have a blowdown on your compressor station. If you can get out of the area, get out of the area. I would leave if I could, if I lived where the Laurys live, less than a mile away from that compressor station. And I know they would too, if they were able to. If you don't have Wi-Fi, and if you don't have cell coverage, and there is no evacuation route, and you haven't taken into consideration the way the roads feed together, and you look at the danger people are in, the majority of this community, it goes a little bit against what people would normally think because of the settlement patterns, the out-migration, and the return migration of heritage families. So the way the Laurys say they returned back to the area, to where they grew up, this is something that happens in Union Hill. We have a large number of elderly people that live within 1 mile of that compressor station because of these historic family lands, because they're going back to have this kinship of their childhood. So we have a lot of people who are elderly. We have a lot of people with pre-existing health conditions. When you go to the church and you see the number of people who have walkers and canes and would not be able to get out if there was a massive explosion on a 42-inch high compressed natural fracked gas pipeline, they're not going to be able to get out in time. And if it's a homecoming where there's hundreds of people that have come into that area to be with their family, or if it's a Sunday afternoon in the there's 2 historic African American churches within 1 mile of this, none of this has been taken into consideration. And so when they say that there's Dominion has put forth a good plan, it's all going to be fine, they're going to work with the firefighters, everything's good, there's no risk, and then you listen to these community members, they have never been listened to. They did not come up with a good plan for evacuation. They have not considered out emergency evacuation, but more than that, when we brought it up and we asked them to halt, I was on that Governor's Advisory Council, we said, stop these pipelines and look at environmental justice violations. There's racism here. We said it clearly, we used those words, we said stop. The governor sat on that letter for a month, did not even reply to us for a month. When we finally got a notice back, the answer was, well, FERC really messed up by giving that permit, but there's nothing we can do about it now. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission gave that permit. The Board of Supervisors did it. So, oh gee, it was so awful, and we really agree with you, but that was bad, but we gotta go ahead with it now. That's lack of accountability. You know what else he did when we kept pushing? They told us, again, I was serving on the council, they said, make your plan for next year. There were very clear hints that we should not be talking pipelines. We talked pipelines because there's the Southside Connector, which is another predominantly African-American community. They're putting that pipeline next to 6 public schools. It's next to senior centers. It's next to hospitals. You do not put that type of infrastructure, large pipes in, and not talk to the schools, not talk to the families. You can't slide that in. Community members thought it was a water line. You have to be communicating with the public. We have a reason why there's public comments, and they're not just supposed to be so people can get upset and have a 3-minute buzzer go off on them. And so we can actually hear and do something about it, and nobody is listening in Virginia. So the Governor's Advisory Council put together these different areas, goes back to the Native American land rights. As you may know, we've had several tribes become federally recognized. Their lands are very impacted by these pipelines. There was no time for free, prior, and informed consent when you have a situation where tribes have been fighting for recognition for decades and don't feel like they can say anything. Then, before those pipelines were approved, they should have been brought back into a new consultative process with FERC. They were federally recognized. That pipeline had not been approved. How could you not talk with Native American groups? And the ones that they did realized that they needed to go talk to. They went in with the same type of agreement, was a boilerplate language, basically saying, it's all good. Sign here, chief. And so they have not worked well with Native American populations. And I don't know that they could in this political context. But in so many different ways, there has not been that lack of response. We know there will not be the monitoring that needs to happen. And we haven't had the follow-up to even ask the questions. Everybody in Virginia, I don't know how many of you are following our situation right now, people are not talking, they're not asking questions, and if you do, you are not in the room. You wanna know who didn't get on the new advisory council? Governor's Advisory Council? You want to know why?
The EJ Council.
The EJ Council. Want to know why I was the one person screamed from the last council who didn't make it on that applied? Because I say what I'm saying right now. They need to be held accountable. When we ask to meet with them, they try and set up a meeting 2 months down the road. They say it's contingent. It might be canceled. No, you need to go talk to an aide. But when you go talk to the aide, you can't talk environmental justice. You have to talk about transportation. You have to talk about Chesapeake Bay. These are our issues. This is what we will engage with you on. We will engage with you and you, but not you and you. And if you even mention the word racism, you're not allowed in. You're not going to be part of this conversation. You can't look at what is happening in Virginia in these frontline communities without saying racism. Is it only race? No, there's poverty, there's income, there's all kinds of marginalization. I work with communities that are elderly, that otherwise might be considered privileged, but because they are elderly, they have not been treated the same way. We have discrimination happening at every single level. We're not having the conversations that need to happen in the government. So what is the collaborative going to do? I mean, one of the prompts here was going to say, like, how do we make sure that the new Governor's Advisory Council is independent? It is not independent. There's nothing independent about it. It's being run by the state agencies. They set the agenda, they set the topics, they screen people to put them on. There is nothing independent about that advisory council. Are there good people on it? There are some good people on it. Is it going to be an effective council that's going to be able to make things happen? No. It's set up as a token, look at us, pretend that we're addressing these issues. That's how all these citizen councils work in Virginia right now currently. We have very serious councils with the Air Board and the Water Board that are long-standing. They're before our Department of Environmental Quality. They are citizen boards that should be making fundamental decisions. Our governor stepped in right before the decision on Union Hill, removed 2 people who were likely to vote on the side of Union Hill, took them out of the way, made sure there would be no replacements there to be able to make the decision. That's meddling. That's overstepping. That's at the same time eliminating your Environmental Justice Council because they're saying there's a problem. We need to really think about whether there could be any degree of independence in that situation. Every time we have a forum, I don't know if you guys are following, he's on a reconciliation tour. Are people following this reconciliation tour? First of all, most of the stops are canceled because he can't finagle it correctly. Because basically, not only is he only targeting certain organizations, they're closed door screenings. If you're in, and I know people who are in certain African American sororities that have been targeted for this, and other, the firefighters and the veterans, they pick particular things that they think will look good. They try and screen it for a photo op. They're trying to get a nice photo op. He goes in and does his little lobbying, promise, no action. And this is being staged across Virginia. People are furious right now because we can't get any action on any topics. We can't get him to come talk to people when we want to say, what are you going to do? What they did with Union Hill that I find incredibly offensive, and I'm going to say a couple of things I think we can do, and then let's throw it open to the audience, and all the points that were being made about the legal cases and the permits. And this is what I do my research on full time, so I would love to talk about any of those details. But I did want to come back to what the Department of Environmental Quality did, because I know there's a lot of people who are trained in environmental justice in this room, and this is offensive that this happens in this day and age. They used EJ Screen. How many of you have used EJ Screen? And you know what EJ Screen is for, correct? It is to work with communities as an educational tool, correct?
Yes.
They used EJ Screen to try and say Union Hill is not an environmental justice community. They used a tool that was made for frontline communities for educational purposes with every possible disclaimer on it about the data, about all of its limitations, and what it was meant to be used for. And they repeatedly, even I and other people had called them out and said that is an inappropriate application. They used EJ Screen to say it's not toxic, it's rural, nobody lives there, and there's no African Americans. Oh, and by the way, there's no history too, just so you know, that's also in their process. How can they use tools like that and then stand up and say that they do not need training? So what I have asked for, straight up, top to bottom, our Department of Environmental Quality needs some very serious, and any of you here that have any ability to encourage this from the inside, very serious training, and not just among themselves, because I've seen them do it. They think they've got it figured out. They think they know how to do this stuff. They're not even asking the right questions. They're not even in the room with the people that they need to be with to figure out how badly they're doing, how pathetically they're doing. They're in, how many lawsuits? I know of 3 that are standing. I've known of 6. Unfortunately, they're getting thrown out on technicalities and other reasons. This is going to go all the way. You were going to see these court cases coming out of Union Hill, and boy, I wish you were seeing it coming out of Lambert's Point. We're going to have to make sure that it isn't just Union Hill, but Union Hill is going to have these lawsuits, and we need to be making sure that we have the best legal teams that know environmental justice, because at this point, they are being defended mainly predominant by green organizations, and I love the Southern Environmental Law Center. I feel like they've done amazing things for stopping the pipeline. They don't know civil rights. They don't know environmental justice. They don't know environmental justice law. They don't go back to the foundational negatives for the livelihoods of the people who are living there, the land rights, the community, the churches. There's so much that will not be treated when you look at air permitting. I think you have to look at air permitting. I would go the whole way with air permitting. I want 1,000 cases getting at why their rights were violated with air permitting. It is not just about the air permits. And that's why we were trying to go through our air board, because they look at siting, they look at zoning, they look at the history of the community. They look at the economics. They look at waste in. They look at products out. Our air board did not do any of that. Our air board did not do any of that. They said they were going to do that. They said this was going to be a case looking at issues of race. And then they came back and made a decision saying that Hampton Roads needs energy. And I was standing there with the elders, and I saw you guys, the way you reacted, every single lie that came out of that air board, and when they pushed that through. And I will never forget seeing your faces as you heard them talk about issues that had nothing to do with your community, and decided to grant an air permit on topics that were entirely unrelated for their own economic interest. The person who made that decision had a conflict of interest. His family is invested in the natural gas and energy companies that are connected to the pipeline. William Ferguson, there has been news articles on that. If he had stepped out because he had that conflict of interest, there would not be quorum. This air permit that's going through is not legal. They do not have legal grounding. They have shoved it on top of this community. They have bent every rule. They've done divide and conquer. That $5.1 million for a community wellness center, as you put in a compressor station, is one of the most astounding things that we're sitting back and watching. And so what you said, Mr. John, there with the omission and the commission, we are all guilty. We are all sinners. But boy, we need to hold not only Dominion accountable, but our state elected officials. They're really pulling one over on us. And the things that I have heard, that the first time I met Ruby and John, one of the stories that I heard will always stick with me. And this is what tells me about this state government. Ruby and John keep a running farm, as you know, and their livestock are very important to them, and they're very worried about what the impact will be of the compressor station right there. But you weren't certain you were going to be able to go make a meeting in the state office. And then the last minute you were able to come in, you came in with your idea, but you didn't have your name on the guest list. They made these two individuals who came through legal screening and had driven all the way in to talk to people about the compressor station. This was way at the beginning of all of this. Sit in the hallway. How do you treat elders like this, whose lives are on the line, that were facing a compressor station, that drove in to meet with DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, and because their name had not been on a pre-prepared list, sat in the hallway? That's how they were being treated before this became in front of the Governor's Advisory Council. So even though we got disbanded because we came in hard defending this community, and I would never do anything else listening to the words and seeing the experiences and being in that community, anybody who hasn't been there, please do pay attention to what's going on in Union Hill. We've gotten a real shakedown in the press in terms of people trying to say it's a lot of things it isn't because of that divide and money conquer. But anybody who goes there and spends time in that community and sees how this community has been treated knows that we need to be holding people accountable. And I'm going to stop there. I have plenty more to say, but I'll stop there.
So this is audience participation time. So hopefully some of you have some questions for our panel. Go ahead.
So, Mr. John, I have a question for you. This finding that there's no history in this community and that there are no African Americans, what does that land mean to your family, mean to your church, mean to the town, to the history of the state of Virginia? How important is the town of Union Hill?
The history part, I'm still learning more of the history. Now I know I was told that my grandmother on my father's side may have been born in slavery. And my grandfather, he died in 1941. The courthouse in Buckingham, where the records were kept, was burned in 1869.
Wow.
A lot of a history where we could
Trace your record.
search because of retribution and because of retaliation they feared, they burned the courthouse some of the people who may have some, you're not talking. Now, there's a library in Charlotte at UVA called the Small Library. We've done some research in the basement there on the slaves. But they only use the first names of the slaves, not the last name. And most of the slaves themselves, they took on their slave owner name, which the slave changed it. If they did have a last name, they changed the last name. For example, my last name is Laury, but it may have derived from a French name, which I believe was probably from the Huguenots. The largest plantation, I believe, in Virginia. I can't think of the name now.
There's a lot of them.
Say again?
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, but this was huge. I mean, thousands and thousands. Back in the late 1700s, it was $100,000 being transferred from and of course they use the name stock. And under this particular major plantation owner, it broke down to other smaller groups. But, so the last names may have been changed, but not only in one particular area, but they were scattered out in, I live in Buckingham County. There's Nelson County, there's slave owners there, grave sites in Charlottesville or Albemarle County, Thomas Jefferson at his home place there's a grave site, but there's no markers, no headstone.
So it sounds
But
like,
for as Buckingham is concerned, that one particular grave site, we're still investigating and looking for more, which we know there are plenty more. That one particular grave site we went to, there was 2 headstones. And one name on it was Pride, which we know they used to live not next door because he were in the country, but our closest neighbor.
So there's 400, they're thinking, bodies at that site that you're talking about, at least. I mean, it's massive, and it's really just been made public in the last couple of years. So plantation for former
the foundation of the question that I was asking you, Mr. John, is that it sounds like the history of this country, the history of the first colony, Virginia, the history of enslavement, it all runs right through Buckingham County.
Can I say something else that runs through? Go ahead.
Actually, I just want to hear from him.
Bucket may not necessarily have been, but Virginia and South Carolina were a hotbed of slavery. Virginia had, I would dare say, they had the largest share. And depending on how the slaves act, they were shipped farther down. When I say how to act, there's stronger resistance, I should say a better word.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to ask another question.
Were you done? Did you want to continue? We'll get to your question, I promise.
That's what I would like to really continue research on. Now, they do have methods now, and they have routes that can go into the grave sites. what needs to be done.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Can I make one connection before we change topic? Because I do think this was really important to bring up. And it is not related to that history that far back. It comes to the more recent history. So one of the things we haven't talked about from Union Hill, and I wish I had a better map here, this is the Transco Pipeline. So the Laury land is right off of the Transco Pipeline. Their family land has been 50 years. There's been one of the biggest pipelines in the country. It actually has 3 36-inch pipes that go straight through the center of Union Hill. The reason why this compressor station and the ACP is happening right here in this specific area is because of this other pipeline. This is the Colonial Pipeline, and this is the Colonial Pipeline. So we're talking about what has gone through this area, it being the history of the U.S. Like if you go back to where these pipelines are cited, and this is specifically the focus of my research because I don't think people have been paying enough attention to this, where this compressor station is coming together, the 2 pipelines and the compressor station, that is also a historic family land. Richard Walker of the Harper family wanted to be with us here today, and we're working with him very closely. We're looking into those technologies exactly for identifying sites. But basically, their family land, which is held by more than 100 Harpers who live all over, but that go back 5 generations to Taylor Harper, who as a freed slave in 1885 purchased that land, is the site where the compressor station, the ACP, and the Transco come together. Dominion Energy is fighting in a court of law through eminent domain to steal that land from that family. There's an eminent domain lawsuit for profit that because this community does not get any gas from that pipeline, will not get any gas from that pipeline. The value of that land has been nothing because of Transco for 50 years. They've come in, they've cited that place, and now they're trying to take that land away from that family. Again, it's these family lands that have been held collectively across time. So sorry, I wanted to mention the pipelines because it isn't just and the plantations around them that have been bought up, they're all logging companies and mining companies. Like it's these same patterns going on over and over again with these extractive industries.
So my question is just for Mr. Caffee and Mr. and Mrs. Laury. I know a lot of people in academia, a lot of white people, sometimes say that, oh, if people just had training or that had this information, that there would be change or there would be transformation or that they would do the right thing. I think history sometimes proves otherwise. People can have the information and still do make terrible decisions. I know that approach hasn't been successful in communities where I've previously lived. So I'm curious from your perspective, what do you see needs to fundamentally change to get at the core of some of these issues or the challenges that you're facing in your communities?
Well, for one, in Norfolk and the Lambert's Point area and other communities, I hate to say it, but a lot of our people, as far as black families, really don't know about the issue that the coal dust brings. And then when we've been trying to educate the communities, they are more, right now I would say, they're not looking at that so much. They're looking at their immediate need of trying to survive, to pay rent, to take care of their kids. To them, that's the most important thing that's affecting them right now. So we've been trying to do a lot of education in the different communities, which has been a struggle. We've even started doing workshops at the different churches. We're trying to do workshops, but what we're finding out there, that Norfolk Southern has donated a lot of money to the different churches. So that means that the pastors are not really on board with us to really do the education. I think we've had it's a lot of churches in Hampton Roads where the train goes through. We've had about 7 pastors that would allow us to come in and do workshops on the coal dust issue. And so because of that, we do have a legal strategy that we are proceeding now, but we kind of had to change from the coal dust in the air to connect it with the coal dust in the waterways. And we've been doing some discoveries, And like on the train tracks and the waterways, we found pieces of coal dust as large as this. That's on the banks and on the railroad tracks. So if it's pieces like this right there by the waterways, then that means it's pieces in the water.
Well, it's basically the same thing that he's saying. It's education. They really have no idea what these poisonous gases, how they will be effective. And so we have our pastor who has been standing up for us. He's about the only one in our area that is, standing up for us. As a matter of fact, he was even arrested in Richmond, at the governor's mansion. And we have, basically that's it. They just need to be educated. Dominion has come in and as I said, offered this money, and we have the church, the one church, I'll just say the name of the church, Union Hill, where our pastor was the pastor there and at Union Grove. And they decided they were gonna vote him out illegally. Of course, they did it. When you pull someone out, you're supposed to face them. They did it behind his back. So, that's one way that Dominion has gotten through to divide us and cause this division among our people, or division among the people, because we have other people that once the money was stated, they came in saying, people I never saw before in the meeting, just came out of the woodworks when they heard about the money. But it's just, I don't want to call them ignorant, but, it's just, it's ignorance on their part, and that they need education. I don't know if anybody ignorant, but,
It's very difficult. If a person is struggling financially, bills have to be paid, and they hear money is available, and you're trying to tell them all money is not good money. It's a short term thing. Your health is more important than this little few dollars up front. You gotta think a little farther down the line. And then also, the Dominion people that they have in place, they have a powerful propaganda machine. They know exactly how to come in and how to divide and how to sweet talk these people and make the sun shine when it's raining. Good. No doubt about it. And so the people say, well, I gotta eat. And then so few of the younger people are attending churches. And you have the young people going out and not buying into the church as if they're gonna live forever. They're not so interested in their soul. Where they gonna spend eternity. That's spiritual enrichment. How they gonna deal with the issues, the challenges of the day. Like money gonna solve every problem. So people are just it's a confused generation. Right now, look at our leadership, and morals are low value. So we're dealing with all these issues, and we're running from our real source of help. searching, shifting, not stabilized. And we're trying to say, look, this stuff is poison, it's no good. And here's on the other hand, here's some money. You need the money. Well, we all need money. Nobody what it costs. We can only break through there. Takes time.
We actually have to end, unfortunately, because it's 11:50 and that was the time we were told we need to move into our next session. So thank you very much, and please give a round of applause for them.